Thanks for tuning in for Times Art Center Berlin's online program in conversation with Naufus Ramírez-Figueroa and Pablo José Ramírez. My name is Xiaowen Zhu, the Assistant Director of Times Art Center Berlin. We are the first nonprofit parallel institution set up overseas by an Asian museum, namely the Guangdong Times Museum. I'm now recording this conversation from our space in Central Berlin. The weather here is great, but we have two brilliant speakers today joining us from afar. We have this talk on the occasion of our current exhibition, Más Allá and Mar Canta, Beyond the Sea Things, Diasporic Intimacies and Labor. Curated by Pablo, the exhibition borrows its name and takes inspiration from the book by the Afro-Chinese Cuban writer Regino Pedreso. It scrutinizes narratives of migration from China to Central America and the Caribbean as a starting point to consider systems of kinship and ontologies of intimacy. Naufus' work, along with other amazing artists' work in the show, speaks from the dilemma of diasporic subjectivities powered by explorations of colonial labor, personal and collective motifs. First, please allow me to introduce our speakers today. Pablo José Ramírez is a curator, art writer, and cultural theorist living and working in Guatemala and Amsterdam. He is the adjunct curator of First Nations and Indigenous art at Tate Modern. His work revisits post-colonial societies to consider non-Western ontologies, indigeneity, forms of racial occlusion, and sound. He holds an MA in Contemporary Art Theory from Goldsmiths, University of London. Ramirez was the recipient of the 2019 Independent Curators International CPPC Award for Central America and the Caribbean, and is currently the editor-in-chief and the co-founder of Infosonica, a curatorial platform dedicated to the research around non-Western sonic cultures. Ramirez is part of the curatorial team of the Carnegie International 58th edition. Naufus Ramírez-Figueroa is an artist based in Guatemala City. He holds an MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and was a research fellow at Jan van Eyck Academy in Maastricht in 2013. Using performance, sound, drawing, and sculpture, Ramírez-Figueroa's work conjures live and sculptural representations that explore themes of loss, displacement, and cultural resistance. He has recently participated in numerous solo and group exhibitions. His work, currently on view at Times Art Center Berlin, is titled Chiperrec. It's a hanging installation consisting of a deformed Camellia sinensis tree cast in bronze. The form and size of the tree is inspired by the tea-producing trees in Guatemala. So welcome. And Pablo, would you like to first give our listeners a bit of context of the exhibition before you dive into the conversation with Naufus?
Of course. Thank you so much, Xiaowen, and thank you to the Times Art Center for this for making possible this project, and today, well, special thanks to Naufus for being here. It's great to spend some time chatting with you, and especially around a work that has brought so many connections, so many windows for the exhibition, and it somehow connects, it resonates with some of the main kind of axioms of the exhibition, which, as Xiaowen mentioned, is called Más Allá, Mar Canta, Diasporic Intimacies and Labor, and it's a show that looks at the history of the Chinese diaspora in Central America and the Caribbean. So the show aims at kind of like building upon a constellation of different narratives that comes in this case from artistic practices ranging from performance, sculpture, installation, sound, and moving image. Most of the artists, or all of them in one way or another, have been engaged with research, with personal stories around the Chinese diaspora in the region. So I would say, as we discussed during the exhibition with many people that attended, that it's not necessarily an exhibition about it's not a historical exhibition as such, but it's more of a project that tries to understand the region known as Central America and the Caribbean, which is crossed by so many colonial histories, so much cruelty, but also it's crossed by a kind of a creative force that in this case comes from mestizaje, from the histories of mestizaje, of cultures that find each other, right? Like the diasporas at the end. The flip side of coloniality is resilience and is creativity. And this is, of course, manifested in such a wonderful way in the practice of artists such as Naufus. And in this case, this is a wonderful opportunity to dive in a little bit more into the work that Naufus presented for the show Chiperrec, but also into the research that allowed this commission to happen. This work was commissioned for this exhibition, and we were really happy of making it possible. And now the thing is that when these projects happen, and I'm sure Naufus agrees with it, there is so many things that are left outside of the object, right? Like the histories of research, many archival material, conversations. So I think that this is a great opportunity to listen a little bit more from Naufus about it. So diving into it, Naufus, I don't know if you want to maybe tell us a little bit more about this work. I think that this talk is going to be listened by people that actually went to see the show, but many others that haven't. So we can also explain a little bit more on like what is that we're talking about when it comes to Chiperrec and also your practice at large, of course. So if you want to give a little bit of introduction of the piece, thank you.
Thank you. Well, the work consists of a small sinensis, Camilla sinensis tree in like in real life size, as I saw them in the Chiperrec plantation in Alta Verapaz. And oh yes, so there's this dwarf tree hanging from the ceiling, and there's a chain holding it up, and from it there's beaded work with medallions, and the medallions are made from transparent black resin, and they're based on drawings I made of me thinking about the history of the plantation Chiperrec, and also the history of tea, which was of interest to me, and also partly the history of the Chinese in Central America. And so to start, the thing that really made me or inspired me to do the piece was seeing the dates when some history books said that the first Camilla sinensis tree entered Guatemala, which is mid-19th century, and then the dates that Robert Fortune stole tea trees from China were really close, and I still don't know how that happened. But as you might know, the Robert Fortune was he worked for the, as far as I know, but I mean, I don't have my notes. I didn't make any notes, but he worked for the British Army, and he was hired by the British government to enter China to steal tea trees. Britain had a hard time dealing with China because China was independent. It was self-sufficient. It didn't need to import anything, and it only exported. It exported luxury goods such as silk, tea, porcelain, and other goods. And the tea was paid in silver always. China demanded silver. And of course, this was not a good deal for Britain, who wanted to penetrate this market. And of course, the first thing they did was gift Chinese people opium, so they would become addicted and they would have a reason to import something. So opium was grown on the British colonies in Asia. What is now India, Afghanistan, and so far. And then so there's this thing about trying to weaken the Chinese independence and impenetrability to colonial power, and in that sense, get cheaper tea, get cheaper porcelain, get cheaper fabrics and other goods. And so Robert Fortune was part of this operation. He entered China through one of the ports, or I forget the name of the port that was open to Westerners. And then he disguised himself as a Chinese person and was able to penetrate all the way to the area of Yunnan, where he kidnapped Chinese indigenous people from the area, and he stole a few trees, and which he transported from China to the English colonies, and the reason why he needed to kidnap some Chinese indigenous people is because the tree is the tree, but the process of how to make the tea taste differently is what was really valuable to Britain. So then bringing that knowledge into India was the goal. And at the same time, there was a lot of interest from Germany and Guatemala. And Germans are bringing a lot of new plants to Guatemala to try to exploit. Guatemala until that time was depending a lot on indigo plant and also on cochineal color. And but of course, as chemical replacements for these pigments were replacing the natural dyes, then there was an open space in Guatemala for European investors. So tea happened to be one of these plants that were brought over. And in terms of the medallions also show in a way, the dealings with the Germans in Guatemala. A lot of the Germans in Guatemala were coming from the German colonies in Africa. So they were also bringing ideas of how to treat people from those colonies. And as we know, some of those dealings of how to treat people in the German African colonies were later used in Second World War in the cruel treatment of people. So it all seems to be connect in a really messy way, but concretely in Guatemala, there was this as always, this forced mix of blood between indigenous women and German men, and this cruelty, but apparently also a way to live together at times. And this sort of fell apart in Second World War because U.S. intelligence agencies published documents that German companies in Guatemala were directly aiding the German side of the war, and specifically Chiperrec, where there would be large meetings of the German colony, and also the storage of arms, which would be sent over to Germany. So so Chiperrec was taken away in Second World War from the Germans, who were sent to concentration camps in the U.S., and the land was given to Mayan women as a cooperative, which is a kind of a beautiful ending in a way. But also the history of this plantation I try to express in these images is that the plantation is on above a series of caves which are sacred, and they're the Chiperrec caves, and also there's that. I think also in a way I felt like for the indigenous people in part of Yunnan, the tea is a spiritual being, and then I don't know, I felt like it was appropriate that it ended in this tea plantation in Guatemala. But of course, the mode of looking at the tea tree is very different, because in the indigenous way in Yunnan is to leave the trees grow as big as they can, and to just pick the new leaves. But in Guatemala, I think we learned this very harsh colonial way, which is you cut the tree every year down to the almost the bottom. So the trees are now 200 years old, but they're short and they look deformed. They're not aesthetically beautiful. They're ugly short trees, and which I think, I don't know, it's appropriate. And I also have to say that Chiperrec is not very good quality tea either. I mean, I really enjoy it, but they probably need some workshops from Taiwan or China on the techniques of of drying it and these things, because the flavor is not very good, but the quality of tree is very good. So it's the technique, I guess. So these are the things that interested me, and also I am not sure if of course Guatemala was privy or was receptive to some migration of coolies in the 19th century who were fleeing from the nearby British colonies, such as Belize. And so, I don't know if any coolies worked on that plantation, but they did work in the sugar plantations in Baja Verapaz. So it's possible, But this thing of power and history, and these medallions, which are obviously very figurative, and they're a little bit like storybook illustrations. I really wanted to go full into the narrative, because the narrative is really strong, and everything that I've mentioned can be verified, even though it sounds so crazy. And at the same time, you think, is it really important knowledge? Maybe it's not important knowledge. I mean, who cares if there's a tea plantation? The oldest plantation of tea in the Americas is in Guatemala. Who cares? But I don't know. But and of course, Alta Verapaz and the history of Chiperrec. There was a lot of violence during our war. So there's murals near the plantation of men whose limbs are all chopped off, and they're they're tied on trees. So there's also this, very violent and this thing about resistance, I think on both ends. And yeah, so this was my interest. And in a way with this piece, sometimes I try to clean the aesthetics or make it a bit more palatable. But in this case, I really wanted, this very explicit thing. And in a way, I think it ties into the series I did a few years ago called Obsidian Mirror, which was very graphic, figurative drawings, fantastical sometimes, around my experience of the Civil War, or images that I can't really depict in black and white. So those images in the Obsidian Mirror were black ink on black paper, which you can only see kind of if you move your head because of the different reflectiveness of both things. And in this case, it's black transparent resin, which I think is not visible immediately.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to follow up with some things that you mentioned. I mean, it's such a fascinating history, and it's fascinating because I believe it's somehow emblematic of how complex coloniality and the diasporas and labor actually is, right? So we could say that in the history of this tea tree and the history of Chiperrec, it is contained the suffering of so many people, as you have also mentioned, the cruelty of British colonialism and Spanish colonialism and so on. And one of the things that I was thinking about is, so we have on one hand the political history, right? So we have the Civil War, like the Second World War, and how that kind of like impact the transition from like German owned plantation to this cooperative of indigenous Quechua women. So the history, the political history, but on the other, let's say, kind of like a maybe less seen entanglement of some kind of let's call it some kind of interspecies politics, right? Like how is that the tea tree changed as well? And as you said, what you said about the taste, for instance, of the tea is super interesting, right? Because then what we have, it's a kind of like this Chinese tea tree in Guatemala that, because of different conditions of production, of cultivation, has changed as well. So it's something else in a way. And it is also a taste, a flavor that we as Guatemalans know very well, right? So like the Chiperrec, it's something like, I mean, we grew up tasting that tea as local, right? It was something, but it is something very local. So I was just thinking on how is that we could say that the tea is also, let's say, just to be a little bit playful, a little bit of a mestizo tea, and as a mestizo tea, that also relates to the same history of mestizaje related to the Chinese and indigenous workers and so on. So I don't know, like, what are your thoughts on it? And like looking at the cooperative as well, and how is that now it's owned by an indigenous women's cooperative?
Yeah, you're right. It's apart from chirmol, it might be one of my earliest taste memories. Chiperrec tea, and it has no associations of fanciness or foreignness. It feels totally Guatemalan and common, because you can find it in every little store. And I mean, it was interesting. I got into the hobby of collecting Chinese tea when I lived in Berlin a few years ago, and I was in a shop buying. I was exploring at that time the different varieties and the different grades, to how much I can afford and, how much I cannot. And then there was another customer there, and we were both tea tasting with the owner. And then he said, "So, do you have tea in Guatemala?" And then I thought, oh, and then I said, "Yeah, we do." And then I hadn't really thought about it, but I told him, "Yeah, we have the oldest teas outside. I mean, maybe I don't know. Maybe they went to Kenya first. I don't know, but outside, China and India. So, but it's not good, Like I've given the tea to some of my Chinese friends that their parents collect tea, and they've tasted it, and obviously the quality is not there, but maybe it was good enough, at that time. And we have to imagine that this tea was originally brought to Guatemala for import into Germany. So maybe it was good enough for German tastes at the time as a low quality tea. And I believe the same people that owned the Chiperrec tea also had cacao plantations. And that was an important crop for Germany. So anyway.
Yeah, and that it happens. I mean, not quite the same history, but it happens that also with some other natural goods, right? Like I'm thinking on cardamomo. How do you say cardamomo? Cardamom.
Right? Yeah, that was also brought. The same person that brought tea trees brought tea. It's the same.
Oh, it's the same person. Okay, right. Yeah. Yeah, so that is something about that these natural goods, right? And how is that we tend to kind of like forget that colonial entanglement. And in the case of the Chinese tea, it's I mean, I find very interesting how it really crosses with this big kind of global historical traumas, right? Like the Second World War, like, how like there was this connection between that plantation and the Nazi regime and so on, right? But also then like the CIA and the expropriation of land. So that is fascinating. And thinking about that, Naufus, I'm curious about like looking more at like your practice and how is that you engage with this kind of very complex research, but then something that I've always been kind of fascinated and interested in, with regards to your practice, is that how is that you transit between this complex research with so many layers and connections, but then you somehow work in a way that is, I mean, your research, and I don't know if you agree with this, but your research is not translated into the work as a work that just reflects that research. Your research always takes a step forward, your piece, your work, in terms of speculation and of like kind of playing a little bit more with history, right? So you filter. It seems that you kind of filter and absorb that, and then what it becomes the work, it's something else that it's some related to fiction, is related to speculation, but it's also related to history, to facts, right? So in this case, how is that you decided, like, working with these drawings? What was the process for the drawings? And how is that you came up with a little bit of the idea on why, I mean, as you mentioned, how the installation goes in the exhibition, right? This bronze cast tree that is hanging with this kind of curtain with the medallions of resin, right? So how, like, a little bit of the process of the piece.
Yeah, you're right. It's weird. I've told people sometimes that I'm a research-based artist, and I don't think anybody's ever believed me, because the end product is usually very visually rich, so to speak. So there's and there also doesn't seem to be much connection with the research. In this case, of course, there were many ways to see it. And there were many fountains to inform me. Some of them were written by German Guatemalans, painting a nicer picture. But also there were, you know, the documentaries which were more explicit, and then I did see some U.S. intelligence documents from the 40s that were very explicit about this plantation and the workings of the German community, which I know part of me thinks, oh, maybe it's just U.S. propaganda. Maybe these Germans were just growing tea. I don't know, which is what some of the books written in Guatemala by Germans Guatemala say, that it was just this, you know, this U.S. Thing, but I don't know. But at the same time, I guess there's many layers while reading this piece, emotional layers as well, from the taste of tea, as we said, the taste of tea when you're, you know, almost on the same level of coffee, like you're almost given it in your little suckling cup, you know, like in Guatemala you are, or at least you were in my generation. And the taste of tea with milk, and then, you know, other sensory memories of my life in growing up in as a refugee in Canada, where tea culture is bigger, but you know, but then, you know, the emotional reactions to all these cruel and bizarre stories, like how could Robert Fortune do drag dressed up as a Chinese man, you know, across the whole country, you know, and kidnap, I don't know, like all these things. And then part of me was, you know, of course, when I read about the story of the coolies, of course, you know, your heart breaks. These people who were tricked into maybe jobs abroad, and then they were enslaved and sold to various Latin American countries as cheap, you know, workers, which also reflects the history of course, indigenous people and Black people in the Americas. So there's the emotional thing, you know, and the sort of like the mental picture that you imagine reading, which I was coming up with all this when I first visited the plantation of Chiperrec in May to go see the real plantation, you know, because I never visited. And then I was shocked because it wasn't what I imagined, just the shock of reading so much about something and then to actually see it. And I think the biggest shock to me was the ugliness of the trees and the shortness, you know. It was a big shock, but in a way it sort of like brought it all in, you know, the cruelty to this plant, but and also the different, I guess, just the different relations you have as a Guatemala when visiting other towns and visiting other people. I accidentally spilled my teacup on top of a table where they had photographs of the German original owners. And of course I apologized. Oh my God, I spilled tea, but at the same time, I don't know, maybe it was part of my my little pleasure, you know, in soiling a little bit this
cosmic justice.
Yes, but I also find it weird that they had the pictures of them on the table, you know, like, I don't know, I wouldn't have them. But yeah, so how did I come across it? Well, how did I censor? Well, I just draw, like part of my practice, just drawing and drawing and drawing and just picking the images which I think better fit the story. So this was my process, and I knew that I wanted to start. For me, the first image in the series is one of the medallions is a big tree, and there's people sitting on the branches. So for me, it's the the indigenous people of Yunnan and other provinces who ancestrally grew tea and made tea culture before, even mainland China took over it. The tea belongs to them. And then I wanted to end with maybe more of a spiritual thing around their relationship with Kekchi and the land and these things. So there's the last image for me, at least, is this kind of a scarecrow, tall female figure made out of tree branches, like hovering over a group of women that are looking onto it. And also another image of this sort of child figure whose body opens up, and it's the caves of Chiperrec, which underneath the plantation. And yeah, so this is kind of like my way of dealing with or working in it. But at the same time, I feel that I leave enough imagery that people don't have to know the story. And also I feel like the story is a bit overwhelming, because you're skipping from thing to thing, and you're skipping from big things like the opium war, like the opium wars. I mean, that's a huge thing. And then you're skipping to this British ambition to penetrate China and bring it down to its knees. And then, the story of coolies, if you said Second World War, our Civil War. So it's just too big of things, and they kind of tire you, and they take away your energy. So there's this little medallions, and you can pick what you can, and you can research what you can if you want, but you don't. It's optional to look further, which I think is maybe one of the good things about making figurative works, is you can pick and choose what you actually want to analyze and what you want to read into.
Yeah, and I think that you do get that feeling when seeing the work. There is something about kind of like going around the installation and kind of like choosing from that sort of fragmented history which images you want to look at. And something about the resin as well, the translucidity of looking at the image, but also looking a little bit of what is behind, right? So there is something about that personally, I think that it really kind of reflects on this complexity that you just mentioned.
Yeah, and I feel like the medallions, I don't know, have the quality of looking almost like they created photocopies in a way, because it's transparent black resin. So there's a sort of blurriness to it, and like it could go away. At least that's how I saw it.
To wrap it up, like I would just like to ask you what, I mean, from this work, are you thinking? It would be interesting to maybe briefly know what, like, kind of, I know you are working many things now, but like if you want to say something about like what you're working at the moment, and maybe there is some kind of connection conceptually or in terms of like form with this work that we just mentioned, and are you thinking about like kind of like forwarding the research around it, or how is that you're envisioning this?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much information with this tea research that I mean, I don't know what I would do, but I would like to maybe do something else, another work. But I am going after this into the history of silk in Guatemala, which is, I'm on a roll. I really like doing works about history. So I'm right now I'm reading letters from the 18th and early 19th century of the counts of Aycinena and their ambitions for addressing the capital in silk, as they put it. Yeah, but I don't know where that will lead me. But I wanted to do a piece about silk before, when I did an exhibition in Krefeld, which was traditionally the place in Germany where silk was cultivated. And different varieties of silk, silk for cold temperature, and stuff. So I don't know. I'm just going to continue. I'll do this other work around the history of silk in Guatemala, which is, I mean, I don't know where it'll lead me right now through all these letters. It seems like it was enterprise totally run by the aristocrats of Guatemala City. But of course, there's another cruel history, right, of indigenous women's hands working the silk, and the deformities that happen when you're dealing with these insects and dealing with these materials. Yeah, so I right now I don't really know, but I am working on this research now.
That is great. I'm looking forward to see what comes next. Thank you so much, Naufus. Thank you. Yeah, it was lots of food for thought, and to just keep talking. So yeah, thank you.
I was really fascinated and really also struck by Naufus' sensitivity, you know, to those subjects. Especially, I felt really moved when you were talking about how the taste of tea in Guatemala just connects you with the idea of home. But at the same time, doing your research, you are sort of removing yourself away when you are looking at all those historical happenings. And actually, I was also reminded of two Chinese sayings. The first saying, it's 南橘北枳, which means sweet oranges in the south would taste bitter in the north, right? So that's like kind of exactly what you were talking about, how the tea was transported, actually kidnapped from China, from and with the indigenous Chinese person, all the way to Guatemala. And then the second saying I was thinking about was 树挪死，人挪活, which means a shift in position makes a person live better, but when it comes to a tree, it might suffer from quite an opposite result. So again, you know, this is exactly also what you were talking about. I feel like your story like adds another layer of human suffering and the labor exploitation to the tea trading. So I feel like there are a lot of, you know, like interconnecting points just from how you both discussed and described your process, not just the research part, but also your personal observation and your reflection, and through your wonderful artwork. Yeah, I just felt very, you know, nurtured by your conversation.
Okay, thank you. It filled my heart with something else.
Yeah. Definitely. No, it's really something. Yeah.
Thank you both for this illuminating contribution. The exhibition Más Allá and Mar Canta is on view at Times Art Center Berlin until December 19th, 2021. We are open from Tuesday to Saturday, 12 to 7 p.m. Please make sure to check out our website, Times Art Center Berlin, for further information. The exhibition also has an online publication page that keeps evolving throughout the exhibition period. On November 6th, we're going to have a live performance by artist Mercedes Azpilicueta starting at 5 p.m. Berlin time. Stay tuned on our future events and new projects via social media. We will publish this talk on our YouTube channel and Facebook as well. So type in a comment if you have questions for Pablo and Naufus. We'll make sure to pass them on. Thanks again for listening. Keep well and keep healthy. See you next time.